Hey there, and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We are back once more to talk TNA wrestling shenanigans, and today we're talking about pulling the trigger. It's one of those things, a classic that the haters, so to speak, love to say about TNA, about them not pulling the trigger on certain people and whatnot, this sort of thing. Certainly, perhaps they missed the mark on a few people, but it wasn't because they refused to pull the trigger. It's perhaps because they were a little bit slow in pulling the trigger, and perhaps somebody got impatient or something else happened and things like that. These sorts of things do happen. Key example, Monty Brown. Everyone points to Monty Brown and people saying, oh, they should have pulled the trigger. I do think that they should have perhaps escalated it, and they perhaps should have kept him a babyface and some of these other things and whatnot. So I don't know, but again, it's just one of those things. It's a very difficult situation, and at that point, I believe that he had made up his mind to potentially leave because he hadn't, received that main event, and he was right on the cusp of it, So leaving at that point and being a young wrestler again, who wasn't a seasoned veteran, who didn't really know the business, and yes, he could have decent matches, but he couldn't lead matches. And once you're the champion, especially when you're a dominant babyface champion, you need a lot of heels to go up against, to sort of go through. And again, this is one of those things that we've talked about it here and there. People are really, really only interested, or the most interested, that first time that somebody wins a title. Especially the babyface. They suddenly drop off in interest when the babyface, wins it the second time or the third time or the fifth time or the 200th time or whatever it is. If you're changing your gimmick and doing other things, yes, sure, you can bring them in other ways. But again, that first time is usually the peak of interest for the fans with that. And then it slowly tapers off the longer that run goes. But we often talk about, like, how things are in the wrestling industry. At that time, I think, it's tough. You're a young wrestler, like Monty was at the time, and here's WWE offering you a bunch of money, and that again, you never. I hate how sometimes it's one of those situations where it's like, people are going to go to WWE here and there, but it's not always an inevitable thing. I hate that, as I've said before, that like people say that it's inevitable that these people will go to WWE, because I don't think that it is. I think that, Eddie Edwards and Moose and a few other people have sort of proved that, over the years, that they're basically never going to go to WWE. And they're perfectly fine with that. I wonder if, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks are going to stay out of WWE too, like, potentially. Wait and see. But yeah, like, it's just one of those things. I think, again, like, same with like Jordan Grace and potentially Josh Alexander, a few other people that are potentially looking at going to WWE in the next few weeks and the next few months. You'd have to say, well, they've actually done, and made something out of these people. But, you have to look. The thing about making a young, well, I don't want to just say young wrestler, but making a less experienced or a less exposed wrestler, especially, like, it's got to be tough. It's one of those things, because you would to say, argue that, well, thing is, fundamentally, honestly, if you were to look in the mirror to yourself and say, hey, even if we put everything into this guy that we absolutely can, and everything into our heel division that we can for him, like I said with Monty, that we can, or anyone, Joe Hendry, whoever it is, whatever, doesn't matter, even if we were to bet on him and see where we can go with him, the level at which TNA was at the time perhaps just means that they wouldn't have done any better or any more better business than what they were doing at the time anyway, because they were already in a fairly good spot and they just couldn't probably do much better than what they were doing. It would really take somebody like a Kurt Angle or like somebody like that, a more major star, a more international or nationally or even, whatever, more recognizable names to sort of come in. And then I always get the same thing about, people saying, TNA bringing in ex-WWE guys was a bad decision. I don't think it was a bad decision. I think it became a bad decision when they over-relied on that. And some people will say they were always over-reliant on it, but I don't think that they were always over-reliant on it. But at certain points, yes, they certainly were. And I think right now, if you were to actually, say, let's cut every ex-WWE wrestler from every promotion, it would be a heck of a lot of wrestlers from a lot of promotions. I think the most would be right now would be AEW. But I think the lens is a bit different because it's one of those things of, again, sort of this hegemony sort of experiment sort of thing, like if it wasn't like WCW, where it was, literally competing and beating WWE, people were like, oh yeah, they're just stealing ex-WWE guys. When they were actually like going, okay, yes, we're taking these ex-WWE guys, but we're finding more success by utilizing them where WWE was, lacking to use them in some form or in fashion. That's where I think like TNA's their best success came from times that they used ex-WWE wrestlers to bolster their own product, like Christian Cage, like Kurt Angle, like Jeff Hardy, and like a few other wrestlers that came through the works. Like you talk about the early days, like Ken Shamrock. You talk about Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. You talk about ex-WCW guys like Scott Steiner and whatnot. Those guys, and I hate to sort of put some of them in the same boat because realistically, I think Scott Steiner in WCW was seriously underrated, and they didn't pull the trigger on Scott Steiner over there in WCW. They really should have done. They didn't pull the trigger on Booker T. They really should have done. They did give them both world championships later on in their tenure there, but they really didn't make them into superstars the way that they should have done. They didn't even really pull the trigger properly on Goldberg. And then they didn't really even pull the trigger properly on DDP either. They basically didn't pull the trigger on Sting either after Hogan got there. So they basically just didn't pull the trigger on hardly anyone over there properly. But I don't want to get into that comparison like warfare. I'm just trying to say, if you look at things objectively, realistically, WCW didn't do this, and WWE didn't do this either. So it's not just a TNA thing, and lol, TNA doesn't know what they're doing and didn't know what they had or whatever. Well, 2 minutes later or whatever it was, a few months later when, Christian Cage was there, who had been in WWE for over a decade there and doing stuff, and hadn't had the trigger pulled on him, and they said, okay, within a month or whatever it was, I think it was like a really short period of time, maybe it was a bit longer than a month, but it was a very short period of time from when he debuted to when he won his initial title there. It was a very short run. They pulled the trigger effectively immediately on him. They knew that they wanted to push him into that main event picture because they knew what a draw he could be, and they knew that they could build their roster like guys like Monty Brown and some of these other guys and build them up to being on that level. Now, again, I think that guys like Samoa Joe, perhaps like, he was lingering a little bit for a little bit too long at some points, but overall, I think they're sort of like the redemption story that he kind of had where, I actually think this is something that some people said they shouldn't have had Kurt Angle come in and beat Samoa Joe and whatnot, all this. I don't know. I can see an argument for it, but I think the redemption story of Samoa Joe, again, because again, the fans that are there are invested in Samoa Joe. So when they see Kurt Angle beat Joe, it's like, well, yeah, we've seen Joe get beaten, but that's not the end of the story. That's not it. Joe's not just going to wander away and say, well, I got beat and now I'm going to retire or whatever. Joe's going to come back and find a way to beat Kurt Angle at some point, somehow, some way. That was somewhat embedded in fans' minds somewhere, somehow. And, again, even if people thought, oh, well, what's he going to do now? People had that little seed in their mind of saying, well, wait a minute. Samoa Joe just wrestled against one of, if not probably the top wrestler in the industry today, in the TNA ring. So that little seed of saying, well, Samoa Joe is on par with being one of the greatest wrestlers in the world right now today. So just having, thinking that, whoa, he barely didn't win or whatever. He was so close. So what has he got to do just to get that slight little edge? It could be just luck or something else. One night or whatever he could win, whatever it was. Again, saying that little thing of people's mind of saying, whoa, he's probably going to get his comeuppance or whatever you want to call it at some point in the future, and saying getting that revenge or getting that, that redemption for that loss at some point, and it never looked like Joe was just saddled with saying, oh, well, now you're a second-rate wrestler and now you're just going to toil away in the bottom of the card or whatever. They didn't forget about him. They knew that he was an important wrestler, and this was before he won the title for the first time. But now they were sticking him in that main event picture. They had already sort of stuck him in the main event picture here and there, but now he was firmly fighting with more of the main event guys, Sting, Kurt Angle, this sort of thing. Samoa Joe was up there with the legends sort of the past, Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, Booker T, all these other guys that were kind of there and kind of at that kind of level. And he was, trading, with them and being a big deal in that, upper mid card sort of area or higher upper card area. So I don't know. There's a few other guys. I don't want to name too many names again, but it's just one of those things. I think, the perception, I guess. And again, this is probably, again, more of this, I don't know, washing of history. History, again, is written by the winners in a sense. And people never really saw TNA that way, per se. They never saw it, like I said, when WCW was dominating WWE. TNA never really got to that point where it was anywhere near on par or even doing something better in terms of numbers, in terms of buys, in terms of gates, in terms of views, etc., 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 than WWE, because they just didn't have that, base that WWE had for over probably 80 to 100 years or whatever it was, which is, a really difficult thing. Plus, again, they were fighting against literally the whole, identity of the industry. So people saying that TNA refused to pull the trigger on this guy or on that guy or on that gal or whatever else it is, yes, perhaps they didn't pull the trigger at the right time, or they were a little bit slow in pulling the trigger here or there. But you can make that argument for, as I said before, WWE, AEW, literally every company that has ever existed, that they haven't pulled the trigger on somebody or have been slow in pulling the trigger on somebody. Look at Dolph Ziggler, or Nick Nemeth as he's now known. WWE never really pulled the trigger on him. They kind of did-ish, one time-ish, but then when he got injured, well, they never went back to sort of go, yeah, well, he's really going to be an upper card guy, or at least an upper card, jobber, or jobber to the proper stars or whatever. He's just he's maybe a mid-card jobber, or just maybe even a proper jobber. Maybe he can fill in here or fill in there or whatever else it is, but we're not interested in him. Now TNA has brought him in, and now TNA's, pulled that trigger, so to speak, on him. And perhaps, again, it's a little bit too little too late or whatever in some regards, but there is still a level of interest in there in the fans, because again, look at Trinity last year. I was about to say a few months back, but it was a fair few months back. But she had an amazing run there in TNA. WWE never really pulled the trigger on her, never really gave her the big spotlight. Like, she won the championship, sure. But what did that mean? Not a whole lot, because she was never given the spotlight and never really given a whole lot of feuds or a whole lot of stuff to sink her teeth into, or a whole lot of time to sort of showcase what she could really do out there and actually, do this thing. That was the thing. It was like, we know she's there, and we know who she is, and we know the gimmick, but that's about it. She's here, and she puts in the effort, but that's about it. Like, and they give her 2-minute matches or whatever it is. Again, it's like, dude, you can't do anything with that, whatever it is. It's like, even though they'd said, oh, we've done this women's revolution or whatever. Yeah, but you didn't really, did you? Again. And that's what I mean by, again, I don't want to get people to be up in arms about this sort of stuff. I'm just trying to say, here's some real world things, and you need to consider it from all angles. It wasn't just that, Jeff Jarrett was sitting there and going, oh, I don't want to put this young guy over. He was saying, oh, I want to find a way to get this young guy over so he can draw us money. And hey, well, his contract's winding up soon, and how is the best way that we can use him before he's on the way out of here? It was like, oh, well, and it was a bit of a mess there at the end. But again, that was what it was. It was just that way of like, well, now we've got to find things, in this division for him to do so that he can give back to the other wrestlers that are on this roster since he's leaving, to balance out the roster again, so that, some of that momentum, some of that energy, some of that whatever else that we put into him, or some of that stuff that he has, goes into these other wrestlers and whatnot. So again, it's just not always that clean cut of a thing of saying they did this and they did that. No, it's not. Perhaps it is sometimes, but when you look at it in this lens of saying, maybe this is a very specific case. Again, I can't really even think of, again, too many other people that, came through and, perhaps didn't get the trigger pulled on them, or were in a, great spot. There were a few people, I think W. Morrissey was one of them as well. Perhaps they didn't pull the trigger 100% on him. But I think he was working under some sort of handshake agreement, and then said, hey, AEW's interested in me and I'm going to go and work for AEW. And then they said, well, if you're going to go and work for AEW, we can't have you holding our belt unless there's, reason for that, or, something in it for us, or whatever else it is, and whatnot. So, and we've already kind of, or sort of gone through some of that sort of stuff here. So it's like, well, we don't want to have to go through, or was that before it? I'm not too sure actually. But again, like the same sort of thing. It's like, well, even saying so, it's like, well, what's in it for us? And again, then it's like, well, you know, once we know that you're not staying, we've got to do stuff with you that not helps you, but it helps us and our roster that is going to be left here after you leave. So that is, and the same thing with a lot of people. I've heard that Trent Seven's leaving, and that sucks a little bit because again, I think, perhaps like he could have been up there in contention for the title against someone like Joe Hendry or against Nick Nemeth, whoever it would be. Um, you know, and to say, oh well, again, perhaps that will open the doorways, and perhaps that is why he lost to Ace Austin or something like that. It is one of those things that you're again starting to say, well, why was this? It wasn't just because they're not going to pull the trigger on him because they hate him or because of some politics or some bullshit or whatever else. No, because there is a reason behind it, because he said, hey, I'm going to be leaving soon. And they said, well, now we can't give you a big push on your way out. We've got to get back whatever push we have already given into you and given into Speedball Mike Bailey, given into this person, that person, whatever other person that we had. Same with Trinity when she was leaving. It was like, okay, well, we've given you all of this stuff, but now we need the rest of our roster to start looking good, in your presence so that they can go on from here after you've left, because otherwise, what are they going to do? They're not going to have the momentum of beating you and have any more legitimacy after you've gone if you beat them. Some of that didn't happen here and there or whatever, but again, you can't always just win and lose. So again, and sometimes that feeds into the stories or feeds into the matches or the moments or whatever it is. But again, it's just one of those things that I think people's perspective perhaps again is dulled or is uninformed or is lacking, because like they get their information from these hater channels or these hater sort of entities or whatever, or just that sort of perspective of, well, it's easy to hate on TNA and it's popular to hate on TNA, it gets views and gets clicks and blah 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 and this and that and whatever else it is. I'm not saying that they're perfect. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they're not, like the worst. They're not, completely incompetent or terrible all the time. They're people. No one bats 1,000. This is the thing. People forget that people make mistakes. And sometimes, yes, that happened. People made a mistake or whatever it was. But again, they tried to do their best with their best knowledge and the best abilities that they had at the time. So again, it's just one of those things that, you've got to think, wow, why, perhaps, James Storm and Bobby Roode, those guys, I think, like, they should have been world champion a lot sooner, potentially. There's a lot of guys like Eric Young. I think that he deserved a title, the world title, for a while, before he won it. A fair while before he won it. Alex Shelley, very similar set of circumstances. You talk about Kazarian, he's in that boat. There's a lot of those formerly young guys that were in that original TNA squad, and then when they sort of try to do too much WWE stuff. And I get the difference between saying, let's try to find a mass appeal and try to build some of these young TNA guys, because we can't rely on these ex-WWE guys forever and for infinite. but we have them, so we need to use them in our best way to build new talent and build new stars and to keep, the machine going, so to speak. That's how you got guys that were there. Like, you had to have guys like uh, Jerry Lynn. You had to have guys like Sting, Hulk Hogan, whoever else, whatever else. Sting, Ric Flair, all these other guys that had a big name come into the company and put people over. Lex Luger, Scott Hall, all these guys. Whatever. I'm not going to try and name them all, but again, they're trying to pull that trigger somewhat to showcase these young guys being on the same caliber as some of these guys that people, Buff Bagwell, etc. Da 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 will be here forever. Team 3D, same with the tag teams, same with the the women. Why did they bring in somebody from WWE over to there? Not just because they're from WWE and whatever else, and we want to be WWE like. No, we want to bring in somebody that has mainstream appeal, has a mainstream name. People will go, holy shit, TNA has this person. Let's tune in to see what the fuck's going on. And then say, okay, well, not only do we have, Mickey James or Tara or whoever else it is, or whatever else it is, we have Team 3D, we have the Hardys, we have this team, we have that team, we have this X Division star, or that, whatever they are. We have all these people that are from different things and different places and have a big name, or sort of a big name, over here trying to put over our young guys, AJ Styles, Abyss, these guys that are here, and are hopefully going to be here, or at least going to be somewhat mainstays of the company. It's not just about having those, ex-WWE guys. It's about having these ex-WWE guys there to help these young guys get up so that they feel like, oh man, AJ Styles really is one of the best because he's wrestling Kurt Angle, because he's wrestling Sting. He's up there with all the main event guys. He's not, sometimes he wasn't being held into being the champion, but again, he was there wrestling Jeff Hardy, who was, fairly recently at that time, just from WWE, and was the world champion over there. Same with RVD. Like, he was recognized as one of the top guys formerly from WWE. Even though he had his incidents and whatnot, and people had thought, he deserves to be world champion, and whatnot, and wasn't for a long time, etc. There's always all these things where they, try to push people in the right direction, and sometimes, yes, they didn't do the right thing, or they, something fell out of the way, or whatever it was. That's how it goes sometimes. And I don't want to criticize WWE, AEW, any other company much more than that either. But, I'm not trying to say, again, absolutely bad and rotten things about those companies just because they missed on some people. I'm just trying to say that there are these examples of all of this. And this goes way back, way back, hundreds of years. You can talk about anyone from almost any era of WWE where they missed the mark or whatever it was. You can talk about Jake the Snake Roberts. You can talk about the $1 Million Man. You can talk about, so many people. You can talk about WCW not pulling the trigger on Steve Austin, not pulling the trigger on Cactus Jack. Like hundreds and hundreds of examples from any company that was like, well, what was that? And yet no one sits around going, lol, WCW for not, too much for not doing that. Perhaps now they might here and there, but, like they don't really do it. They didn't really do it. And yet every single time that you turn around, it's always, lol, TNA, this thing again, as I sort of say. That's not helpful or not useful and not true. You've got to be objective, and I try to be as objective as what I can be. I am a fan of this, but I'm a fan of it because they do their best with what they've got. So like Trinity, she was mostly there on a handshake agreement, but just for that, like just to have somebody that was, and I was to say that of that caliber, but you know, of, people knew who she was. People 100% knew who she was. And it was like, holy crap, this person's in TNA. What is going to happen next? And they used her very, very well. And they put her in a prominent position for a year, whatever it was. Maybe more than a year. So yeah, no. They have done things, and they have pushed people, perhaps that never got a chance somewhere else, or should have gotten a chance somewhere else at times as well. And perhaps that, people say, oh, well, they should have pushed this other guy. But realistically, the idea was there to push somebody to say, okay, well, we're not just pushing the title onto Nick Nemeth or whoever it is or whatever it is. We're doing that so that we can elevate all of our roster up to people thinking, man, that's an international superstar. It's one of the best wrestlers in the world, somebody who was absolutely underrated in WWE, etc., and should have been the world champion, on probably multiple occasions. You're trying to elevate people up. You're not trying to, bring people down by saying, oh, they're making all these guys lose to an ex-WWE jobber. You're not trying to say that. Like, that is the worst aspect of that, and that is obviously true, as I say. But again, it's one of those things where they're not trying to rely on those, little things. Well, not little things, but again, those negative points. They're trying to relate again to the more common, more mainstream sort of avenue of going, man, they never pulled the trigger on that Dolph Ziggler guy. They should have done something with him, and he should have been a bigger deal. Oh, he's in TNA now? Oh, and he's doing really well? That's great. TNA's giving him a chance. But they're not just doing that. They've got all these other guys that they're trying to push up the card. They've got Steve Macklin, they've got Santana, they've got Joe Hendry, they've got all these other guys that are there. And again, like I say, this is one of those things people get a little bit, I guess, scared. And I am a little bit like that. I love Josh Alexander. I love a lot of these great wrestlers that we've got. But the thing is, if they leave, Jordan Grace, all these other people, if they leave, guess what happens? There's more space to build the next wrestler that will take the face of the company, and perhaps that will only last a few years or whatever it is. But again, now somebody else will get that opportunity to be in that position, and perhaps it will be a sink or swim, time for that person to say, oh, well, can I actually do it? Who is it going to be? Is it going to be Ace Austin? Is it going to be somebody, like Trey Miguel or whoever else? Or, are they going to find their own success now more in the tag team space as the Rascals? Because now, hey, ABC, they're no longer a tag team for right now. And hey, well, we're here, and well, we can do something in this tag team division and be bigger stars in that division, and more than what we have been, before. And we can face the Hardys, and we can face all these other top teams, not just those were dream matches that we wish we could have had when we were, young wrestling fans, but these are, some of the things that we can be doing in our profession to be elevating ourselves and elevating the whole roster and elevating the whole, company and everything, and getting more people interested and more money coming in and all of that. Because that's what professional wrestling's about at the end of the day. People say, this and that or whatever. TNA has been there, and yes, they've had their bad times and down times, but every promotion pretty much has had their up times and their down times too. WWE had several down times in their history. People tend to forget these, even though that they were, the industry leader, or have been the industry leader for like 20 years or whatever it's been. But again, that is what it is. So what? It's just one of those things where you've got to have something else. You can't just have, and that's why I like AEW in some ways, but I do think that some of the things like they do, they need to step back and say, okay, wait, why are we doing this again? what, we've got all these wrestlers and we've got all these shows, and that's one of those things that Eric Bischoff said about WCW back in the day. It was like, I can't figure this out because I've got 2 shows to work for. Now AEW's got like 4 or 5 shows to work for. That's because, again, they have so many people on their roster. It's like, you need to split these things up so that you can say, okay, you're running Rampage, you're running this show, you're running that show. I will be here and I'll be having like some input and some final say, but that's it. Like, I don't want to be involved more than what I have to, because I have to run 3 or 4 or 5 different shows every single week. And then I've got to run my Jaguars, or then I'm going to run this. So he's running himself too thin. That's one thing that I just think that Khan needs to really fix. Just, focus on the absolutely necessary parts of what needs to be done for the shows to be better. Let somebody run each show. Let each show be different, and let the ball roll. Don't worry too much. Just make sure that you're doing the best that you can, instead of just being like, I'm gonna try to do everything, because then you're too departed from everything. You can't focus enough on each thing and make each thing work. That's where I think they need to fix. That's the only thing I think they really need to fix, because if the focus becomes from one person, and I get, as we said before a long time ago, and it's always been true, one person's taste, like Vince McMahon, doesn't equate to everyone's taste. But if you can understand that, what is our audience and what do they want? What are they cheering for? What are they booing for? Why are we going in this direction? We're not just going in that direction just to piss people off. We're going in this direction because we're trying to make money. We're trying to draw people in, get butts in seats, and get interest. That is the ultimate goal of any wrestling company and any business. That is the be-all and end-all. If you're making money, and TNA has done that for 22 plus years or whatever it's been now, so you can't argue with that, as I say. So, and where's your wrestling company that's been around for as long as they've had, and been on TV for as long as they've had, and had the ratings that they've had, and done all the things that they have done, in their history? Yes, it's not all been positive, but it's not all been negative. As again I say, people, think that this business is easy. You can wander in and just, I know wrestling and I will know what to do. Then there's a whole lot more that needs to be thought about, because it's, as I said before, some people still don't understand this. This is not just having a wrestler and saying, here, have a world title, now go off and have a world title run. It's not that easy. You need to have somebody at the top of your company being the drawing power for your company. People need to be interested and invested in that individual, and need to want to buy a ticket to come and see that individual every single week, every single month, every single year, for however long, no matter what role they are in. If they're in a heel role or a babyface role, whatever it is. Sometimes, as I say, this will be their babyface run early on, then they'll turn heel later on, and then they might turn back babyface. I think that those are the wrestlers that are the best wrestlers, honestly. Those people that can play both sides of the fence very, very well, and can get the fans, one way or the another in the seats, effectively. So, but yeah, anyway, guys, I think that's pretty much it here. You guys kind of get the point. I know you guys are more, for the most part, sort of in the middle ground, and can kind of see that there's, but it's just these people that are, not in that middle ground, that can't see the difference between, these issues or these factors and whatnot. It's just one of those things. But we have to keep pushing these things out there, because these are the talking points that are always out there. So it's a lot of the same sort of thing, unfortunately. But it's just one of those things that's what we have to fight with. So just trying to nail people against saying, oh, yes, but, TNA did this, lol, TNA did that, blah, blah, blah. Yes, they did. But so did WWE do this, do that, do whatever else. So did WCW do this, do that. It's not just trying to point fingers. You're just trying to say, yes, but you're not counting all the other instances that are in the industry. You're just trying to single out TNA as some sort of industry outlier for doing these sorts of things or having had these sorts of things. They're not, So, but yeah, guys. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this one and hope you will join me again in another one.